report. St. Anne's, are you ready? Yes, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Thank you. The chair recognizes the honourable member for St. Anne's.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's my honor to be here today on behalf of the constituents of St. Anne's, the great constituents of St. Anne's, to give my third budget contribution in this honourable House of Assembly. As I read through the budget and the compendium of legislative items, I prepared my presentation for today. It's not written out, so I will be referring to different articles and notes at different times, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But I think it's prudent at the beginning, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for me to comment on some of the issues that have continued to come up. It was surprising to me that this administration, as confident as it should be 3 years in, spent a good bit of their movers' contribution as well as other members' contributions talking about what happened over 3 years ago, and still 3 years in comparing themselves to an administration 3 years ago that undeniably dealt with COVID-19, a global pandemic, and dealt with Dorian. You hear this comment about 5 ministers in Grand Bahama, Mr. Deputy Speaker. You hear they got 5 ministers in Grand Bahama. But they had the longest serving prime minister representing South Andros. Go to South Andros. Go to South Andros, South and Central Andros. They can't even get a road completed down there today. And they want to talk about one term where there was 5 ministers. There was 5 constituencies. You had 1 constituency and 1 prime minister over arguably the longest serving period of any prime minister in the history of this Commonwealth. And South Andros is still in the state it basically was in all of those years ago. Look at Centerville, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They had a prime minister in there that served multiple terms. Unfortunate for his record as prime minister, he wasn't elected during the last term. But Centerville was a known constituency, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for still having outhouses and outside toilet issues and water supply issues in the constituency. And you want to talk to me, you want to talk to the Bahamian people about 5 members in Grand Bahama. And now we have a prime minister, Mr. Deputy Speaker, who's been the Minister of Works in past administrations. He's been the Deputy Prime Minister in past administrations. And go look at Cat Island today, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Go look at San Salvador today, Mr. Deputy Speaker. People say that if Columbus showed up today, he would still recognize San Salvador. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's very important that we do not oppress the truth, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And we've seen prime examples of efforts to oppress the truth taking place and being carried out by this government administration. In contributions, I heard an allegation that there wasn't any road works done under the last administration, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I know for a fact, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as Shadow Minister of Works, that there was a tremendous amount of road works done. I've heard the member for Central and South Eleuthera talk about nothing happening in the North Eleuthera constituency in his hometown. The last administration put in a brand new dock there. Brand new dock, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And when you look at what's going on with roadworks, I looked up an article from the 6th of July of 2020. That was during the last administration. Exuma set for critical infrastructural upgrade. Exuma is crumbling. Roads are on track for much-needed upgrade after aging beyond their 15-year useful lifespan. David Cox, the Ministry of Works senior engineer for the Family Island, said the condition of the island roads range from fair to poor, given that they have not been overhauled for more than 20 years. He went on to say much of Exuma's infrastructure is older than 15 years, which is the life cycle of the road's surface mixture if it is well maintained. The last time major works were executed on the island was in the mid to late 1990s. Now, Exuma has predominantly been represented by the PLP. It surprised me when I looked at this article, which was talking about a $10 million contract that was signed for road improvement projects with Caribbean Pavement Solutions. They'll carry out 10 miles of road works in hot mix asphalt, which is the better way to go, Mr. Cox added. The 10-mile stretch of road runs from Exuma International Airport through Georgetown Center, covering its loop, and extends in the opposite direction from the airport to Sandals Emerald Bay. So in 2020, the last administration put in place a $10 million contract for roadworks in Exuma. That's while it was represented by a PLP member of Parliament, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But that's the F&M way. We take care of all family islands. We take care of all constituencies, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And to go back to that point where it said the last time major works were executed on the island was in the mid-90s. Which was the administration in the mid-90s? 92, F&M. 97, F&M. Late 90s, early 2000s, F&M. F&M was taking care of roadworks in Exuma under Ingram. F&M was taking care of roadworks in Exuma under Minnis. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, there's also an article in this paper from Eyewitness News dated November 12th of 2020. Caribbean Pavement Solutions, planning, design, and execution of Exuma Road Improvement Project may be every bit as significant as the construction of the 10 miles of roadwork itself. For this undertaking, CPS unveiled its new $1 million mobile asphalt plant, which can be assembled on-site and just as swiftly disassembled for transport to another island. This is the innovation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the Free National Movement does in the Family Islands. This is the truth. When you're not successful in oppressing the truth, and I will never stand by to allow you to oppress the truth, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the people will be reminded and they will learn the truth, Mr. Deputy Speaker. $10 million of road projects in Exuma and the first ever, historic, first ever mobile asphalt manufacturing plant.
Honourable member, are you going to table the document?
Yes, I have a few, but these two I can table now if you like, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Order that the documents be brought up.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So instead of misleading the people and telling them that the last administration did nothing as far as road works, or the last administration did nothing for Grand Bahama, I mean, let's get back to this issue of Grand Bahama. Who owned the airport before the Bahamas government purchased it under the last administration? Hutchinson Whampoa. What do you need to guarantee a vibrant tourism industry? You got beds. How are you going to get the heads in the beds? You got to bring them through the airport. So when there's one issue with the airport, you're relying on the owner to carry out repair works to get the job done, to keep those heads coming in so they can get in the beds. When the owner decides they're not going to do it, you got the hands tied of the nation's tourism industry and the second capital in the Bahamas. So when the Bahamian government stepped in under the last administration and acquired the airport, that's one of the greatest accomplishments outside of the Nassau Cruise Port that was done under the last administration. You may not understand it, but I can't go into your property and fix your house and then tell you this is what you're going to do with it. I can only do that when I own the property. And the last administration, Mr. Deputy Speaker, saw fit that the international airport in Grand Bahama came under the possession and ownership of the Bahamas government. That's another fact, Mr. Deputy Speaker. That's another fact. That's another fact, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They can't oppress the truth. We won't let them oppress the truth, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Now, what they should be dealing with, Ms.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Pine Ridge.
Clarify something. The member St. Anne's is saying a lot, but first of all, the airport was owned by Hutchison Port Holdings and Port Group Limited, which is also party to the Grand Bahama Port Authority. And the airport was acquired from these entities who had the responsibility to maintain the airport. It was acquired, and the severance pay for the employees was assumed by the government. All of the liabilities, the insurance, and all of it was assumed by the government. So I don't know how you figure that was a great deal. And I just wanted to clarify that because he's making it appear as though this is, the best deal possible. When we inherited, the people of the Bahamas, the taxpayers inherited all the liabilities of an organization that was responsible for the development and maintenance of that airport. So I just wanted to set the record straight there.
Thank you, Honorable Member.
She said the same thing, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm not sure how that qualifies as a point of order. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if they're going to be trying to find out what the F&M did or making false allegations, suppressing the truth as to what the F&M did under the last administration, I'm going to spend a moment in this early part of my contribution as Shadow Minister of Family Island Affairs to bring to their attention some of the things that they need to do in the Family Islands, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Family Islands continue to experience month-long delays for contractors to receive payment. South Eleuthera suffers with blackouts and water issues on a constant basis. We've all heard of what these water issues are and where these waters came from. The Mayaguana Airport, we've all seen photographs recently. You got enough water in there to house koi fish. Water was so deep. Mayaguana Airport is in a deteriorating state. It needs attention. The Graveyard Project, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in Rock Sound, that needs a completion date, or better yet, give a start date. Let's get going, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In North Eleuthera, they remain without BTC service. Geens Bay Dock needs repair and proper parking. The North Eleuthera Dock needs road signs, or the North Eleuthera Highway needs road signs to prevent deadly accidents. The island of Eleuthera, in my opinion, over recent months and years since this administration has come in, has become the traffic fatality capital of the country. And it's extremely unfortunate. And while you may say, no, the statistics say there was actually 7 more deaths in New Providence versus Eleuthera, there's been at least 3 deaths in Eleuthera, and that's far too many. The people of Eleuthera are asking for more signs to be visible on the highways to remind persons of where bends in the roads are, speed limits, your foot can get away from you, a reminding sign can cause you to double check and rethink your speed. It's very important for the constituents of Eleuthera that attention is given to the dangers on their roads. Harbor Island also has light and water issues. The freight dock and passenger dock needs repairs. And the new glass window bridge, which drawings had been completed in the last administration, needs to get underway. When we want to look at what's going on, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and we're in government like the current PLP administration is, I would hope that they would pay attention to what they should be dealing with and not what was done 3 years ago or how they compare now, 3 years in a booming economy, to how the country was 3 years ago, just as the economy was opening back up. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I've looked at the budget and the compendium of legislation, and in my opinion, it's an embarrassing budget, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's an embarrassing budget from an oppressive government. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's difficult to get an accurate idea as to oppression because people living under oppressive governments are usually afraid of saying something that might get them arrested. But for the members of the public to be aware, oppression is unjust treatment of a group of individuals, often in the form of governmental authority. It refers to discrimination when the injustice does not target and may not directly afflict everyone in society, but instead targets or disproportionately impacts specific groups of people. You can have political oppression, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We saw some examples of political oppression, Mr. Deputy Speaker, right after this administration ruled in. There was a number of persons that were fired from their places of employment. Even today, if a young man or a young woman puts his neck out and gets involved in the political direction of his country, he can also and she can also be seen to be removed from their place of employment. Last week, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we saw another example of political oppression where the financial secretary spoke to a member of the press and said, to the effect that I will deal with you outside. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we also had the incident last week, which for 5 minutes caused the member of Freetown, leader of government business, to request an adjournment in this House so the leader of the opposition could be removed. How disgraceful, Mr. Deputy Speaker, can times
The
get?
chair recognizes the honorable member for Freetown.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, that is an allegation against the Speaker. It is contemptuous, and it should be struck from the record. The member was named, he was suspended. The rules dictate, as the leader of opposition business knows, that none of us can dissent from a ruling of the Speaker. The Speaker directed to the specific rule, named the rule, and suspended the member. Mr. Deputy Speaker, and St. Anne's would have learned this, or should have learned this when he was my junior, that a judge can't be wrong in his or her own court, and this is the Speaker's court. And the rule is very clear, and I ask that that statement be struck, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Noted. The chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Barnabas.
The member for Freetown, who's the leader of government business, just said that the member for Marcus City, the leader of the opposition, was named. He is incorrect. And if the member is not sure, maybe he could look to his right, to the member for Cat Island, the Prime Minister, who can teach him very well about the rules of this House and can clear up the fact that this member was not named.
Thank you, honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Anne's.
It's about you. That's what he said just now. You.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Call the police. They gonna call
These are just some examples of this embarrassing budget from an oppressive government. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I gave a definition earlier where oppression refers to the discrimination when the injustice does not target and may not directly affect everyone in society, but instead targets or disproportionately impacts specific groups of people. Now, you can have economic oppression, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Now, while it doesn't target everyone, it can disproportionately impact specific groups of people. One group of people that this administration, this government is oppressing right now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, are the non-Bahamian residents, members of the society. There are two bills under the compendium of legislation that go along with the budget, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And one is the Real Property Tax Amendment Bill of 2024. And it reads that Section 21 of the Principal Act is repealed and replaced as follows. Surcharge. If any tax is not paid on or before the last day when the tax becomes due and payable under the provisions of this act, there shall be added thereto a surcharge from that day until payment, A, for unimproved property owned by a non-Bahamian in the first year that the tax is outstanding, a sum equal to 5% of such tax per annum. In the second year, that tax is outstanding, a sum equal to 7.5% of such tax per centum per annum. And in the third and following years, the tax is outstanding, a sum equal to 12% of such tax per annum. And for all other property, a sum equal to 5% of such tax per annum. Mr. Deputy Speaker, these are taxes that are directly on non-Bahamians. They don't fall on Bahamians, and this is the beginning, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of a point that I'll be touching on through my contribution, is that we're reaching right now, and we're reaching comfortably by saying we're not doing it to Bahamians, we're only doing it to the foreigners among us. We're not oppressing everyone, we're just oppressing the foreigners among us, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Additionally, under the International Persons Landholding Amendment Bill of 2024, there is a provision that notwithstanding anything else in the Act, any permit granted by the board shall expire if the holder of the permit within 90 days of the date of the permit is granted fails to submit to the Value-Added Tax Department the instrument evidencing the acquisition of land or an interested land and pay the value-added tax due thereon, and B, make the requisite return to the Chief Valuation Officer indicating the change in ownership, usage, or other particulars of the property as subscribed. and pay the real property tax as assessed under the Real Property Tax Act. Now, a permit, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when it comes to a land transaction, is a permission under the International Persons Landholding Act for a non-Bahamian who either holds property or is acquiring property in excess of 2 acres to acquire another piece of property. Now, the provisions of that act go so far as to state that if you acquire property when a permit should have been obtained and you fail to obtain that permit, that conveyance, that purchase, that conveyance instrument is void. So not only are they jeopardizing the transaction where a permit has been given to a non-Bahamian because they haven't paid their value-added tax on the conveyance in 90 days, but also that they haven't paid the real property tax. Now, as it is right now, the payment, that the value-added tax on the conveyance needs to be paid within 6 months. So if everybody, except for non-Bahamians, again, this oppressed category, if everybody except non-Bahamians is able to pay the VAT on their conveyance within 6 months, but non-Bahamians must now pay it within 3 months or have essentially their instrument voided, they are being singled out, Mr. Deputy Speaker, unlike others in the community. Now, we also have this issue with economic oppression, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and the very important category of the ease of doing business. More importantly and accurately, the lack of the ease of doing business in this country right now. Pastor Dave Burrows in The Guardian on June 6th of 2024 contributed an article titled Unfriendly Business. And I can table this as well. I'm just going to read an excerpt from his article, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to put the seriousness of this budget and the oppression of this current administration in context. I hope they don't realize it. It's probably true that the person carrying it out is the last one to realize what they're doing. But for the sake of the Bahamian people, this government needs to realize what they're doing. Unfriendly Business by Pastor Dave Burrows, Diplomatic Notes, Nassau Guardian, June 6th, under the religion section. This year, when filing annual returns for business licenses, many business owners received a shock of epic proportions that I have not heard of anywhere in the world but the Bahamas, which now has a regime that requires you to not only pay your current business license, but your business license for the upcoming year in advance. What is outstanding with this is that no business knows for sure what their turnover will be for the next year. Even more perplexing, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that your estimated business license for next year cannot be lower than the past business year. To explain a bit further, let's say last year your business did $200,000 in business turnover. You will file now for the last year and pay approximately $1,000 in business license fees. At the same time that you pay this year's fee, you pay another $1,000 for next year, but you have not done any business yet, and you do not know whether your business will increase or decrease. If your business declines in the new year, you pay based upon last year. I know that sounds confusing, and I have yet to find either a business owner or accountant who has been able to make sense of it, yet it is now the policy of the land. To say this is unfriendly to business would be an understatement of epic proportions. This is not just unfriendly, it is adversarial. It is punitive and anti-business. It is as if you are being penalized for having a business and employing people. It is as if you are being penalized for having a business and employing people. The article goes on. I'm not sure who came up with the idea, but I hope that it is a one-time blunder that will be corrected at the next cycle because it is egregious. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is such a serious issue in our country that it is making it into the religion section of our daily papers. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this one-time blunder, to put it in the nicest of ways, is another example of how this administration is comfortable grabbing for what had previously been beyond its control. Now, if you grab for something that you didn't have before, you're probably motivated by a need to have it, a motivation that didn't exist before. The problem is if you can't control that motivation or that cause, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for you needing more and more and more money, then next year, the target pool is going to expand. It's not just going to be non-Bahamians, Mr. Deputy Speaker, buying land in the Bahamas that have to pay a higher surcharge rate. It's not just going to be that you pay the business license fee for this year and for next year. You can't tell me what it's not going to be because no one has ever heard of it being the way that it is now. And that has to change right away, Mr. Deputy Speaker. That's seen as an economic oppression by this administration. The Nassau Guardian, Mr. Deputy Speaker, had an article today, June 10th, 2024. The unease of doing business. And I'm just going to read the first section. As is evident in the reports we publish regularly, doing business in the Bahamas is often a hassle, with the much-touted phrase, ease of doing business, being an oxymoron. On the one hand, there is dealing with the government, which operates often recklessly and without due regard for the concerns of businesses, despite itself being a multi-billion-dollar operation. There are currently major backlogs at the Department of Immigration, Road Traffic Department, the Department of Inland Revenue, and at other agencies that are needed to get things done. Then there are the regulatory hurdles placed on financial institutions that have made for a complicated and onerous process to enhance the agility and even the capacity of business to operate. On top of that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, are the often unreliable services by utility providers, with Bahamas Power and Light being the chief culprit that harm economic potential. This is a real issue, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's my understanding that this comes under a combination of the Minister of Finance, Minister of Economic Affairs, and the Minister of Legal Affairs. Mr. Deputy Speaker, if you can imagine the issues that we're having with the ease of doing business now, consider being a business, a law office, mostly financial service corporate provider, which has to obtain regulatory information on their clients almost on an annual basis. Anytime there's any change, they need to update the KYC. They need to file information on who the beneficial owner of the company is. They need to make the annual returns. They need to now also, Mr. Deputy Speaker, deal with this added issue of being a tax reporting entity. So on one of the chats that I was on today, it was pointed out that the government is in the process of adding to the unease of doing business by amending statute law to require every company incorporated in the country to notify the registered agent or office of any changes in beneficial ownership of shares, and also of any real estate transactions within 14 days of the occurrence thereof, and further to apprise the registered agent or office of all real estate owned by the company on an annual basis, and that the registered agent or office must then file a declaration with the Director of Inland Revenue, again on an annual basis, thereby adding to the red tape and cost of owning a company and running a business. We're reaching and reaching and reaching, comfortably clawing for what we haven't clawed for before. And it has implications, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's impacting the ease of doing business. It's impacting the operation of a business, Mr. Deputy Speaker. If I can give you an example of how absurd circumstances have gotten. The Department of Inland Revenue, previously the department that was housed on East Street right opposite the police barracks, the headquarters for the police station, moved to Carmichael Road maybe within the last 8 years. Large facility out at Carmichael Road. Very large facility out there. But there's this talk of a new department. I think it's along the lines of the specialty tax department under the Department of Inland Revenue. And what they do, their responsibility is to go after persons with unpaid tax amounts due and payable. Now, what's comical about this, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and absurd, is the fact that, in my opinion, they occupy what is the largest commercial building on Carmichael Road. They were moved out of the Department of Inland Revenue building to what was formerly the Royal Bank building on Carmichael Road. So if you can imagine, Royal Bank still is the government's bank. Payroll goes through Royal Bank. If you can imagine the largest bank in the Bahamas occupying the biggest property on Carmichael Road has now left that property, and that property is now being rented by a tax collection agency. Imagine how costly it is to operate this tax collection agency. No wonder there's a need to claw and claw and claw for more money from the Bahamian people, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Again, this is not just an issue of clawing for more money, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's an issue of the cause. What is the motive? Why are you in need of more and more money? When will you be able to curb your spending? When will you be able to balance your budget, Mr. Deputy Speaker? And then you talk about real property taxes and value-added tax on conveyances and the ease of doing business. And no more than today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, does a notice come out from the Real Property Tax Services Department, the Inland Revenue Department, to say real property tax services interrupted. It reads, the general public is advised that our RPT system is currently experiencing technical difficulties. As a result, tax certificates and receipts cannot be issued. However, payments can still be processed. We apologize for any inconveniences caused. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we talked about Ministry of Education today and how we're moving the grade point average, the graduation level forward. What educated businessman, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what honest government can ask members of their public to make real property tax payments knowing that they can't get a receipt for that real property tax payment? That just goes against bookkeeping 101, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We talk about ensuring that our people have fiscal responsibility, financial planning. A key thing to financial planning, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is don't spend more than you bring in, and anything you spend, get a receipt for it. But yet, our Inland Revenue Department is saying, send us the money, we can't send you the receipt, just still send us the money. It's absurd, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Now, we also have oppression, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the form of the impact and the lack of address being given to our natural environment. This is an article in the business section of the Nassau Guardian on June 5th. DEPP unaware of further Abaco oil spills, but will double check. So I had brought up this issue with the Abaco diesel spill coming from one of the stations, had the images up here to identify which station it was that had been located. But there's still believed to be oil spills coming from there. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what's more alarming for me is the DEPP Director, Dr. Rihanna Neely Murphy, when asked by Daphne de Gregory Meulis, Neely Murphy also addressed the barge still sitting off Man-O-War Channel and said the barge is still sitting out there. This is the director now speaking. The barge is still sitting out there. A notice to have the barge removed has been delivered to the owners and the operators of the barge. Pending their noncompliance within the next few days, the government will step in. Just like the fuel leak, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that took about a month for anyone from the Ministry of Environment to go and check out, you have a barge that hasn't just shown up there a couple of days before Wednesday, June 5th. It had been aground for weeks. If we can't address the environmental disasters that are coming into our country, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have to ask if this government is oppressing our environment. Now, I know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that's not the intention. Now, I know that's not the intention, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because we're going around the world and we're talking about carbon credits. We're talking about how we're...
The chair recognizes the honorable member for South Abaco.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. Just a point of clarification. I believe it's being exacerbated about how many months that the diesel oil, it was diesel spill downtown Marsh Harbor that eventually leaked into the Marsh Harbor. After Dorian, that diesel tank had never been replaced, and it had been many, many decades before that. As soon as DEPP was notified, they had sent somebody there to see what's going on. In terms of the barge, from my understanding, they have been given a certain amount of days' notice to have it removed, or it will be removed on their, and them provided the bill. But this is something that is definitely a concern, and we can't have barges going around landing on our national parks, and this is the second barge in Abaco that this particular company is, and I'm hoping that there's a stiff fine on them. But to say it's the government's fault for a captain that went out in 10-foot seas and tried to turn around because he missed his port of entry is ludicrous.
Thank you, honorable member.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the people have entrusted the government to act diligently. And if you have an oil spill that goes for diesel spill that goes for a month, if you have a barge and a tugboat that have run aground, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for more than a week, even 2 days, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and you haven't acted in a expedited manner, then the risk becomes tenfold. It is unknown exactly what damage is being done to that seabed in that area, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But as I said, these are, as I see them, examples of oppression. And I don't want this administration to think they can't do anything about it. If they can heed some of what I'm saying, then that'll be beneficial for the Bahamian people, and it will be beneficial for themselves as well, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Now, I'm just going to look at a couple of the other pieces of the compendium of legislation in case they become more of a topic of debate as we go on. And then I'm going to get into the second part and my conclusion of my contribution today. Mr. Deputy Speaker, if I can look at the Immigration Amendment Bill of 2024. This was mentioned in the mover's contribution, and the aspect that I have a question with, especially because of the way it's currently worded, is the Section 2 of the amendment, which deals with Section 17A of the existing Act. It says that Section 17A of the Immigration Act is amended, A, by deletion of the paragraph A of subsection 1 and the substitution of the following. This is the new subsection A. Has made an investment of $1 million for a minimum period of 10 years. 1, in real estate in the Bahamas, or 2, in zero coupon bonds issued by the Central Bank of the Bahamas. As it is now, the threshold is at $750. Not too long ago, it was at $500 for a number of years. It's now at $750. It's my understanding by this that it's going to go up to $1 million. But what I don't understand, and from the way that I read this, it appears as though you have to not only invest $1 million, but you have to have invested it for a minimum of 10 years. Now, for someone on a work permit, they can be in the country generally on a work permit for 15 years, and then they can apply for permanent residency. They haven't spent $1 million, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They probably taken a good portion of money through through public education, through medical health care, sending those salary earnings outside of the country. But the way this is, It says, has made an investment of $1 million for a minimum period of 10 years. To me, this reads as though after you've made an investment of $1 million, when you're in your 10th year, you can apply for and obtain permanent residency. I don't think that that's what the intention is, but if it's not the intention, the alternative, Mr. Deputy Speaker, would be that you've made an investment of $1 million and you get your permanent residency and you keep your permanent residency if after 10 years you still have an investment of $1 million. It's not clear, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and this is one item in the compendium of legislation that should be changed. As it is now, someone has to invest $1 million, hold that investment for 10 years, and then apply. Based on the way the oppressive government has been going, I think the most favorable manner would be to say you invest $1 million and you hold it for 10 years, either the same investment or another investment, but you have an investment in the country. But then then the Immigration Department would be overburdened with another criteria to check. They already have enough issues checking to see whether persons are validly married. But you would have the issue of going back after 10 years and asking them, do you still own property in the Bahamas? If not, your permanent residency has been held for 10 years, but now we're going to rescind it. So I don't know what the policy is there, but the way it's worded, that's how it comes out. I just say that it has made an investment of $1 million. That would be fine by me. That would be in line, and that would have increased the amount of. That's what we've been doing. That's what we've been doing for years. I mean, if you think the country is no good, then you can.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Central and South Abaco.
I stand up for a clarification. I don't mean to interrupt the good member from saying as, but I think he's quite misleading. I'm trying to figure out where he's going to, because he's defending foreigners' interests on taxes not paid, and saying that they have more rights in the Bahamas than we do, when I have many examples of foreigners buying property, never paying taxes for a couple decades, using all of our facilities, and then selling the property and then paying the taxes at a lower rate at the end. And that's in line. And then speaking about the 10 years and the $1 million, well, it's a common practice in the real estate market. They come in, they buy a house, they get their permanent residency, and they put it right back on the market, and they get to keep their permanent residency. That's not right. That's not how we grow an economy and whatnot. So I just need some clarification from the good member from St. Anne's on who on who he's working for, the foreigners or the Bahamians?
Thank you, honourable member.
So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the member for South and Central Abaco didn't clarify the position of his cabinet on this policy where you invest $1 million for 10 years. Is it after 10 years that you can apply, or is it that you invest and you keep your permanent residency for 10 years, and then at the end of the 10 years a review is done to see if you still have it? With regard to the real property taxes that he's finally caught up with, Mr. Deputy Speaker, my point there was that this government is an oppressive government. And oppression exists, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when there is discrimination, when the injustice does not target and may not directly afflict everyone in society, but instead targets or disproportionately impacts specific groups of people. Now, just from the compendium, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I gave the examples of non-Bahamians having to pay an increased surcharge. I also gave an example of every single Bahamian participating in the business community complaining that the ease of doing business is a blunder, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that it's an unheard of policy, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that you pay your tax this year for what is due, and then you estimate what your taxes are going to be paid next year. On top of that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you have issues where persons have filed their VAT returns. They're expecting rebates on their VAT returns, but earlier this month, Mr. Deputy Speaker, they were told they can't get their return now, just pay the tax, we'll get the money back to you later. So don't stand up on this old PLP line about the F&M looking out for foreigners. I'm looking out for all Bahamians, and I'm ensuring that this administration discontinues
chair
its practice
recognizes
of
the
being
honourable member
an
for
oppressive government.
Freetown.
Point of order, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Sedan's can correct me, but I heard him to say that every business owner is complaining about something. I would just like to know if that is what he's going to, what his point is, because that's an assertion that every single business owner is complaining about something. If that is what he suggests, then that would be misleading. If he was just exuberant and overstated it, then he can correct it.
Thank you, honourable member.
So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you have the hardworking business owners in this country that have no political connection, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I'll correct my statement. I'll say the vast majority of them, Mr. Deputy Speaker, are complaining. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you have an article in the religion section of the Nassau Guardian, Southern Central Andros getting excited, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I got another 20 minutes on my feet, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Order, members.
Nah, you're not cutting me down. You're cutting the Bahamian people down. You're clawing for too much.
Yes, sir.
It's disgraceful.
Yes, yes.
So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there's no clarification on this policy for an investment of $1 million for a minimum period of 10 years. We know that they're seeking to change the status quo. Mr. Deputy Speaker, looking at the Customs Management Amendment Bill, we also heard that ATM skimmer machines are now on the prohibited goods list, which means you can no longer import them. Now, does this also mean that we have legislation somewhere that has made them illegal to continue to possess? Is there an amnesty period where they're to be turned in to the Royal Bahamas Police Force? Or are we just saying that we're essentially putting a moratorium on the ATM scanning business so no one else can bring them in, but if you got them, you keep them? Someone can clarify that when they get up. Yeah, there's a fly flying around here. South Andros. It's attracted to the warmth, my brother. There's compassion over here. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there's also this issue of these amendments to the Road Traffic Amendment Bill. Now, the Road Traffic Amendment Bill, as it relates to these cancellation and reporting on certificates, we understand that from the industry, that there is an alternative way to accomplish the same objective that is actually less cumbersome and more efficient. But what this administration is doing, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that they're including now a penalty. The suggestion is consult with the industry leaders. Contact the insurance companies. Do some consultation. We have a task force. Man, keep your task force. I already saw your task force raiding all the marinas. Armed Royal Bahamas, yeah, oh my God, that's right. Armed Royal Bahamas Defense Force officers, representatives from the Department of Inland Revenue, representatives from Immigration and Customs, and also from NIB and from Immigration, Mr. Deputy Speaker. That's a task force, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that was imposed upon the Bahamian people last week, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And without any apology, Mr. Deputy Speaker, without any notice, most they were doing was going into these places of business and demanding to see their NIB records, check on the reporting. All of this is online nowadays, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but what in fact they ended up doing was intimidating persons, impacting the yachting industry, and even though they were advised that this had happened on the day when marinas from the Nassau Yacht Club to Brown's Boat Basin to Bayshore Marina to Bay Street Marina had been subjected to this task force, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but they also went out and did the same thing to a major tourism commercial operator in the country the following date. It is absolutely disgraceful, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we would go around armed amongst our tourists, intimidating the marina operators. That during COVID and even was felt in Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, provided some type of economic stimulus boost to the local economies from persons participating in that yachting industry. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is what this oppressive government sees fit to do to the Bahamian people. And at one of the locations, the armed Royal Bahamas Defense Force officer with his weapon on him asked one of the employees, a female employee, if she was afraid. What business does that have to do with the operation of that marina, Mr. Deputy Speaker? These are hubs that are bringing in stopover visitors into the economy. They're bringing in stopover visitors that visit not only New Providence, but also several of the family islands, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They're basically tourism ambassadors because they're bringing people from outside of the country into the country to experience the wonders and beauties and the exceptional hospitality that's found in this country. So that is an example of this government's task force, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But if I can go back before I was so rudely interrupted to this Road Traffic Act, if there is a failure to provide a notice of cancellation to the controller by the insurance agency, the authorized insurer, is subject to a fine for one certificate of not less than $5,000, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Not less than $5,000. Not $5,000 or less, but the minimum, Mr. Deputy Speaker, would be $5,000. And if an individual has canceled their insurance policy and they don't advise the controller, they're going to have to pay $2,500, Mr. Deputy Speaker, or face imprisonment for a term of 3 months or both. It shouldn't be, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that insurance companies with such a short notification period are going to be made subject to paying $5,000 every time that they may fail to disclose the cancellation. And what's going to happen, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if $5,000 is imposed on the customer's premium? If they've canceled the insurance, premiums are going to go up, Mr. Deputy Speaker. If the cost of business goes up, the cost of buying goes up, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, before we had that incident on Thursday, and before the financial secretary conducted himself the way he did, I was looking at this budget and trying to figure it out because there wasn't really much said about it. And I looked at it as though it's a get the money out budget, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And the reason it's a get the money out budget, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is for several reasons. But one is that the numbers don't lie. Another is they're just simply whispering about it. And then the third, we have all these PPPs that are hiding loans, basically off-the-book loans. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as it relates to the numbers don't lie, we began the budget debate on June 5th. So when we came into the House on June 5th, we went to bed the night before, seeing nothing but positive reporting on the budget. Lo and behold, wake up June 5th, and the picture isn't as rosy as originally represented. You have in The Guardian on June 5th an article titled Status of FOIA Implementation a Mystery by reporter Rachel Scott. And an excerpt from the article says, the Davis administration has allocated $140,000 once again for freedom of information, but it has been nearly 6 months since the public has been updated on efforts to fully implement the Freedom of Information Act. The Organization for Responsible Governance, ORG, said on Monday it was sorely disappointed by the allocated funding of $140,000, which it noted is inadequate for any real progress on FOIA implementation. This amount is insufficient for necessary technology, training within the government, and public education, org said. You also had, Mr. Deputy Speaker, an article in the same paper that said government increases subsidies for SOEs. That was by Tanika Thompson in The Guardian. And an excerpt from that says the Davis administration has increased subsidies for state-owned enterprises and statutory bodies by $9.6 million in the 2024-2025 fiscal year. And it goes on to say the government has budgeted $465 million for recurrent subventions for these entities in the upcoming fiscal year, compared to $455 million that was allocated in 2023-2024 fiscal year. And notable increases include the subsidy given to the Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas, which will rise to $10.3 million. The Clifton Heritage Authority subvention has also risen to $3.7 million, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And then finally, from The Guardian on this day, and to my point about the numbers not lying, the fiscal outturn slip at start of the year. So another article in the Guardian on the same day, June 5th, by Candia Dames. The Ministry of Finance yesterday finally released its monthly fiscal summary report for January and February 2024, both showing a slip in fiscal performance when compared to January and February of 2023. Preliminary data on the fiscal outturn for January 2024 showed an estimated deficit of $45.9 million compared to a modest surplus of $3.1 million a year earlier. A year earlier, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we were in the money. This year, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this government has us $45.9 million behind in debt. The report said this outcome reflected a 26.5% or $70.8 million increase in spending. $70.8 million increase in spending to a total of $334,600,000, which offset the 8.2% or $21.8 million rise in revenue receipts to $288,700,000. So we are bringing in a revenue rise in receipts of $21.8 million, while we were spending, Mr. Deputy Speaker, $70.8 million. I said earlier, a basic element to fiscal management is you don't spend more than you take in. This administration in the first 2 months of 2024 compared to the first 2 months in 2023 has spent $70.8 million and only taken in $29.5 million, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for South